And so we finally made it here, as we near the end of our monthly Gotei 13 series, where each month we take a deep dive look at one of the 13 divisions that make up the military arm of the Soul Society. We finally reached arguably the most popular division of them all, arguably the division with the most screen time of them all as well, being of course the fight-loving band of thugs and ruffians that is the 11th Division. The 11th Division is remarkably simple. They love to fight. In fact, fighting is what makes life worth living. If you want to be a part of the 11th Division, you better love a good battle, and that's really all there is to it. Members of the 11th Division not only pride themselves on their strength, but their ability to never give up no matter what. A member of the 11th Division would always rather die swinging than ever surrender to an enemy. Members of the 11th Division hold fast to the ancient values of swordplay and swordsmanship, to the point where they will look down upon any Shinigami that utilizes anything other than the blade when it comes to combat. Despite the fact that there are 4 officially recognized Shinigami fighting arts, those in the 11th Division will only use Zanjutsu, or the art of the sword, when it comes to defeating their enemies. And I do think it is this straightforwardness, this simplicity that helps them resonate with fans. After all, we're here mostly for the amazing fights. Of course, Bleach being a battle series, it is those spectacular fights that really are the monumental set pieces of the entire story, and so what better division to resonate with, to connect with, than a division that's as all in on the fighting as we are. It makes perfect sense. What's also really cool about the 11th Division is it feels purer in many ways than the rest of them. It feels like a true holdover from some of the earliest days of the Soul Society. And so in this video, as we have with the rest of our Gotei 13 series, we're going to take a look at the 11th Division in greater detail, looking at the important characters within this division, the division's history, and the role it has played throughout Bleach, which this time is a substantial one. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support for me another step further, I do have a Patreon as well. And of course, before we begin, I just want to say a massive thank you and a huge shout out to everyone supporting me over on Patreon. I really do appreciate it. And of course, before we get started on this video, there will be spoilers for the entire series of Bleach ahead, including the 1,000-Year Blood War. Despite their gruff and often brutal exterior, the 11th Division is also unflinchingly traditional, and they are the keepers of the blood-soaked tradition of Kenpachi. This division is wholly unique in its embracing of this kind of a tradition, and they keep the idea of Kenpachi alive. It is firmly associated and affiliated with the 11th Division, as of course the idea of Kenpachi was created by none other than the first captain of the 11th Division, Yachiru Unohana, also the first holder of this title of strongest Shinigami of any given era. One of the things I've always found to be so compelling about the 11th Division is that when you look past their forward-facing bravado, their macho talk, their seeming surface-level simplicity, they are a division of secrecy as well, which I think gives them some much-needed depth. Outside of Kenpachi Zaraki, the captain of the 11th Division for basically the entire tenure of the Bleach story, who himself is unfailingly honest, those he surrounds himself with have all number of secrets to their name, which I've always found to be really fascinating. Ikaku, the third seat, doesn't want anyone to know about the existence of his bankai. Yumichika, the fifth seat, doesn't want anyone to know about the true nature of his Zanpakuto. Yachiru, the vice-captain of the 11th Division, is secretly, in fact, actually the bankai spirit of Kenpachi Zaraki's Zanpakuto. And then, of course, there is the head, the original head of the 11th Division herself, Yachiru Unohana, who, for almost the entirety of Bleach, keeps that very fact a secret, seemingly from everyone else and certainly from the reader. And I love that. I really do think that's awesome. It means there is more going on with the 11th Division than it first appears, but it also helps to keep Zaraki himself quite pure, as he doesn't really have any of these kind of secrets. He really is the kind of person who is what you see is what you get. And it's awesome because in that sense, Zaraki himself does feel like the perfect embodiment of the 11th Division. You get the impression that he is what he wants the division to be like, but it's never going to be quite that simple. So then, if we do a general overview of the 11th Division first, and take a look at the characters who are important within this division, one of the principal reasons why this division is probably the one with the most screen time of them all and the most popularity of them all, contested only really by the 6th and the 10th divisions, is that the 11th division is the one that has the most amount of prominent faces within it. Outside of the captain and the vice captain, which is the same for every division, they are the ones that get a lot of screen time. With the 11th division, you also have the duo of Ikkaku and Yumachika, the 3rd and the 5th seat, who are a major part of the supporting cast, which means in general, the 11th division is easily one of the most exposed, if not the most exposed in Bleach. Some other characters to have been a part of the 11th division in the past, of course, include both Renji and Iba, who eventually became vice captains in different divisions later on, and then, as I mentioned earlier, the original captain of the 11th division, the very first captain 1,000 years ago, was none other than Yachiru Unohana, who would eventually become a pacifist and take on the name Retsu Unohana as the captain of the 4th division, the medical division. And Unohana is a fascinating character in her own right. She is the one who started that blood-drenched tradition of Kenpachi. To become the captain of the 11th division, there is no other way than to prove your worth in front of every other member of that division by killing, by slaying the current captain of the 11th division and the current holder of that title of Kenpachi. The captain of the 11th division and the title of strongest Shinigami are intrinsically linked when it comes to the 11th division. There isn't one without the other, and so that bloody tradition changes hands each time a new captain is crowned. Of course, there's a great irony in this as well, in the fact that Unohana, the very first Kenpachi, is still alive. No one has killed her until the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, which effectively renders every single Kenpachi after her until Zaraki totally moot. In terms of other characters, in terms of the actual source material itself, those volumes behind me, the only other Kenpachi we're aware of is the 10th Kenpachi, who was around 110 years prior to the main story, Kenpachi Giganjo, a lazy slob of a man who didn't take his duties seriously and was eventually killed by Zaraki. Of course, in the supplementary light novels, we learn of two other Kenpachis, Kenpachi Kurayashiki and Kenpachi Asashiro, but these division videos only focus on the actual manga itself, but I have done separate videos on those characters if you wanted to check those out. Now, this division has changed a decent amount over the years. It's well known that when Kiganjo was in charge of the division, his kind of layabout, brutish nature filtered down to the rest of his division members, and it was during that time that the 11th division was basically flooded with bandits, with actual criminals, with thugs and outlaws and other horrible people like that who would run amok within the Gotei 13. Once Zaraki took over, despite appearing on the outside to be the same kind of person, we all of course know that Zaraki inside does actually have a heart of gold and was able to restore some semblance of order and respect to the 11th division, to the point where we see these people all have an extreme reverence for Zaraki himself, which mostly keeps the division in line. That being said, the 11th division is still well known for being Soul Society's troublemakers, particularly where the medical division, the 4th division, is concerned, who get bullied relentlessly by the fight-loving members of 11. This is because there is a total clash of ideology between these two divisions. The 4th division is all about being non-combatants, being about battlefield medics and doctors and healing those Shinigami who go out into war and get injured. But as far as the 11th division is concerned, there is no honour in that. If you go into a fight, you win or you die. You shouldn't be saved by somebody else. You should go into a fight basically being ready and willing to give your life if necessary for the thrill of the battle. You should fight because you love it. You shouldn't be scared of battle, and you shouldn't be scared of being injured. Of course, there is some hypocrisy there, especially as we see later on. Many of these characters are being healed all the time, and of course it's being healed that allows you to carry on and fight again another day, which is one thing I love about Unohana in particular, is that she doesn't buy into any of this rubbish that it seems the later iterations of the 11th Division have bought into, this almost false bravado that healing is for the weak. No, she explicitly learnt how to heal so she could heal herself in the middle of a battle and keep it going for as long as possible. It does feel like those ancient ways, the most bloody of ways that she herself utilised in order to keep a battle going as long as possible, have in some ways died out. The 11th Division's insignia is the yarrow flower, which symbolises bravery, courage, and is also known as the soldier's wound wart or the military plant. So of course you've got the obvious connotations there between the battle-loving division and a flower that has implications for war. The flower is also known as the Devil's Nettle and comes from the flower family Achillea, named after the invincible hero Achilles, who I think we can draw some comparisons with Kenpachi Zaraki, who himself is seen as a hero on the battlefield by his men, and is of course in many ways invincible, known for being virtually impossible to bring down. But I would argue his fatal flaw, much like Achilles' heel, is that originally, early on in the series, he couldn't communicate with his Zanpakuto at all, putting him completely at odds with basically every other captain. Then there's the fact Zaraki has a self-imposed Achilles here, which I think is a really cool little connection, this idea that he has placed a lock on his own power. We just talked about this in the last video I uploaded, but that could also be seen as his own fatal flaw. Interestingly, the flower is also associated with both love and healing. Now, the 11th Division does have an uncontested love of fighting, but certainly this idea of healing seems to be an antithesis to how most of the division feel, and I can't help but think this in particular is referring to Unohana. The division's official colour is lavender, and this symbolises both purity and devotion. Again, ideals that very much suit the 11th Division. They are in many ways the purest of all the divisions. They seem on the surface to be very simplistic. However, the flower also represents serenity, calmness, and grace, and it seems again like all of these things are attributed to the original captain herself, Yachiru Unohana. Now, as for the 11th Division's role in the larger story of Bleach, like I said, these guys do get a ton of exposure. They are heavily involved in all of the major arcs, while ironically not really getting anything to do in the smaller flashback arcs, and I think that showcases that a lot of the time the 11th Division just isn't bothered about getting involved with the wider affairs or the wider politics of Soul Society. Of course, we need to begin our chronological look at the 11th Division 1,000 years ago, right the way back to the founding of the Gotei 13, as the 11th Division is one of the ones that we have any hard and fast information on. Of course, the 11th Division was founded by Yachiru Unohana, a vicious, bloodthirsty criminal recruited by Yamamoto himself to effectively be his right-hand lieutenant who would help him build the Gotei 13 from the ground up. And so Yachiru, coming in from the wastes as this vicious criminal, would effectively weave everything that she knew, that she believed and she had learned into the very fabric of the 11th Division, which is where the tradition of Kenpachi comes from, which is where their unending love of battle comes from. And so we know that after this, numerous other Kenpachi eventually took her place, eventually followed in her footsteps, while Unohana herself decided to resign herself to a life of pacifism, becoming instead the captain of the 4th Division, until eventually we reach 110 years prior to the main story, where, like I said, the captain at this point was an oafish man called Kenpachi Kiganjo. We never actually see Kiganjo during the Turn Back the Pendulum flashback, but he is alluded to by Shinji, who seems pretty dismissive of him as a captain. At some point after the Turn Back the Pendulum arc and before the present day, a man from the district of Zaraki would arrive, kill Kenpachi Kiganjo and take the place of not only the new Kenpachi, but also the captain of the 11th Division. Taking up the mantle of the captain of the 11th Division while also drawing the ire of some captains like Kaname Tosen, Kenpachi Zaraki would cement himself as the newest captain and would remain the captain of the 11th Division until the very end of the series. At some point after his appointment as the captain of the division, Zaraki was taken aside by Yamamoto to try and learn the art of swordsmanship, to try and learn kendo, because Zaraki himself had gone years without any formal training, and so was basically just swinging his sword like a feral beast. Now, the Central 46 demanded that Yamamoto stop this training almost immediately due to Zaraki's latent ability, due to his true power that could theoretically be unlocked. Of course, if Yamamoto had kept going with this training, it's possible that Zaraki would have re-attained the power he once had as a child that he subconsciously locked away. And so Zaraki would only ever use kendo again if his life depended on it. Now, despite not being the first captain or even the first division that we get to see, Zaraki is one of the first captains we get to see, appearing in the Agent of the Shinigami arc right at the very tail end to tease Byakuya about his current situation regarding Rukia, before getting uncharacteristically captured by Gin and hauled away. I can't imagine that would ever happen again once these characters were a little more well-defined. So when it comes to the first major story arc, the Soul Society arc, the 11th Division already has a pretty large role to play, with Kenpachi Zaraki being one of the tentpole milestone battles for Ichigo's journey, while Ikkaku and Yumichika would arrive even earlier than that, Ikkaku being Ichigo's first major opponent upon actually getting in to the Seirei itself. While Zaraki attempts to locate the strongest member of the Ryoka, Ichigo battles Ikkaku in what is actually a really good and I think underrated fight, particularly in the source material where Kubo's art is truly on display here. There are some amazingly dynamic shots, it genuinely looks wonderful, and at the same time Ganju Shiba takes on Yumichika. This fight you definitely see slightly less of it, but it's still pretty cool to get these supporting characters, the 3rd and the 5th seat, playing major roles as early as this. And this battle between Ichigo and Ikkaku would kickstart a rivalry which would become a friendship between these two characters, which would last the entirety of the series. In general, the 11th Division plays a pretty large role here in this arc, scouring the streets, patrolling the alleyways, causing trouble, causing a ruckus really wherever they go, abusing characters like Hanataro, who also play a decently sized role here, obviously a member of the 4th Division, and really just getting across the overall personality of the 11th Division and why they are a division to be feared. As for Zaraki himself, he's kind of treated as a mythical figure here in the Soul Society arc, which I think is handled really well. Kubo builds up to Zaraki's eventual battle against Ichigo in a really effective manner, creating this idea that he is this boogeyman, that he is this monster hot on their tail, and that when he does eventually catch up to them, it's going to spell lights out for our heroes. And Kubo, again, artistically, does a fantastic job building the tension for Zaraki. The moment Ichigo senses that killing intent closing in on him, it's depicted as a skeleton holding a blade to Ichigo's throat, this ethereal, ghost-like figure. A blade even bursts through Ichigo's chest. He feels that much murderous desire on his back. Really, really awesome. And Zaraki himself, again, just looks great in these early scenes where he is covered in shadow, a massive, toothy, wolf-like smile on his face. And of course, his battle against Ichigo is legendary. Like I said, while the fight against Ikkaku is a good one, this is one of the first major milestone battles Ichigo has, really after Ichigo versus Renji. This is the next true test of his strength that he gets. And I think that while this fight does adhere to many of the traits of Zaraki's fights that would follow, basically being slugfests between sword wielders with nothing too fancy going on, certainly no magical spells or abilities, just pure swordsmanship on display, It's a weird fight for Zaraki, I think, in that it feels extremely claustrophobic. It is between buildings, it's in these alleyways. Ichigo is always being confronted by this massive Shinigami who comes crashing through buildings, like he is ominously chasing Ichigo, like there is nowhere to run. I think that's really cool about this fight, and I'm looking forward to eventually tackling it in a battle analysis. But their monumental battle ends in a stalemate after Ichigo is able to borrow some of Zangetsu's power, illustrating the difference between somebody who works with his Zanpakuto as a true partner in comparison to somebody who has a ton of raw, almost limitless strength and an actual well of Reiatsu that just leaks and spills out of Zaraki at all times, but he has no relationship with his Zanpakuto whatsoever. He just swings it around and bats it around as though it were nothing more than a stick, nothing more than a tool. And so because of that, Ichigo, despite Zaraki's overwhelming strength, is able to end the fight in a draw. Now here is where things get really interesting for the 11th Division, and in my opinion this is where Kubo would really begin to mould the character of Zaraki moving forward, that he's not just some bloodthirsty maniac, he's not a monstrous villain on the side of the Soul Society, he is just somebody who loves a good fight, and is willing to even help out people who might be enemies of the Soul Society if it means getting him a good fight later on down the line. And that's why I think Zaraki, and by extension the 11th Division, are quite simplistic. He doesn't choose the Ryoka out of some greater moral understanding of the situation, he just does so because he wants to find and meet up again with Ichigo, and he thinks that helping out Orihime is the way to do it. But regardless of whatever the reasoning, the 11th Division quickly finds itself on the side of the good guys come the big civil war within Soul Society. Ikaku and Yumachika take on Iba and Hisagi respectively, while Kenpachi battles the captains Komamura and Tozen. There's a really cool battle to unpack here as well, and again this is another one that I can't wait to talk about in greater detail, but Kenpachi duels Tozen. Tozen uses his bankai, plunging Zaraki into a dank, dark world of zero sense whatsoever, but Zaraki still thrives in this pitch black hell, as Tozen calls it, able to overpower and defeat the captain before taking on Komamura's bankai, before eventually the truth about Aizen's deception is revealed and kind of all the fights are just called off. Concurrently, like I said, Yumachika takes on Hisagi. Hisagi basically defeats him very easily until Yumachika reveals that actually his Zanpakuto has a true nature, something he keeps hidden from everybody else, because as Yumachika spells out, in the 11th Division you have to be someone who not only loves fighting, but loves fighting using basic swordsmanship, using melee, physical attack Zanpakuto. Particularly Kido Zanpakuto are extremely looked down upon, spit upon even, but that is the true nature of Yumachika's, and he uses it to defeat Hisagi. Meanwhile, Ikaku and Iba's battle is a little more friendly. They are good friends anyway, like I mentioned before. Iba is actually a former member of the 11th Division, but Ikaku says that he left because he knew he would never make vice captain of the division, and he wanted to get that promotion in order to make his mother happy. But once the fighting eventually ends, once Aizen has left, we see that Ichigo is training within the 11th Division barracks himself, actually battling Ikaku before Kenpachi arrives to try and fight him. And while Ichigo is terrified of him, this ease of which Ichigo is training within their barracks shows that already he is growing really close to this division out of all of them. When we arrive at the Arrancar Arc, the 11th Division once again has a massive role to play. A lot of that is down to the fact that Ikaku and Yumachika are both members of the Hitsugaya Advance team. They go to Karakura Town along with other characters to defend it from the early attacks from the Arrancar. Here, Ikaku gets easily the best fight of the series for him when he battles Edrad Leones, reveals his hidden bankai. Again, we've done a video on that very recently, but it's easily one of my favourite fights of this arc, and definitely Ikaku's best fight in Bleach. Of the two of them, Yumachika is definitely sidelined more often. He does seem to take a back seat when Ikaku wants a fight, when Ikaku gets in the mood for a fight, and Yumachika is technically the weaker of the two of them, so again, in some ways this does make sense. But their camaraderie has always been really interesting to see. And again, I love the multi-layered relationship that they have. The fact that Ikaku keeps this bankai a secret from virtually everyone, but Yumachika knows the truth. He's able to confide in Yumachika with that secret, but Yumachika does not tell Ikkaku about the secret nature of his Zanpakuto. That is something he keeps solely to himself. Later, this same advanced team would battle the newly promoted 6th Espada Lupi, with both Ikkaku and Yumachika being pretty easily overpowered until they're saved by Hitsugaya. When Orihime has been taken to Wako Mundo, the advanced team is called back, and sensing some discord from the Shinigami, sensing some potential rebellion, Yamamoto sends none other than Zaraki himself along with Byakuya to kind of quell any rumblings of dissent and bring them all back to Soul Society. However, come the Wako Mundo arc, when it appears like Ichigo and his friends have been defeated, who should show up in the nick of time to save them but Kenpachi Zaraki, leading a squad of 4 captains and their respective vice-captains to help rescue Ichigo and his friends. Zaraki kills the Fraction Tesla in a single hit, something that feels like it would become his trademark moving forwards, before battling the 5th Espada Neutra Jiruga in an all-out brutal battle to the death. Exactly the kind of fight you would associate with Kenpachi. Once that fight ends and war is waged in Karakura Town, Zaraki informs Ichigo of the truth of the situation, that the Soul Society is ready and waiting, and they are set up preparing for battle. And included in that setup is Ikkaku and Yumachika. They have been selected alongside Kira and alongside Hisagi to protect the 4 pillars of fake Karakura Town that's preventing the real Karakura from swapping in as the battle gets underway. Yumachika finally gets his moment to shine as he uses the true power of his Zanpakuto, still in secret, to defeat the Fraction Charlotte Coolhorn, but Ikkaku is the shock defeat of the group, not willing to use his bankai in the presence of others, and instead willing to not only lose, but forego the mission as well. I do love this characterization for both Yumachika and Ikkaku, when Yumachika is so elated and grateful to have been hidden away by Charlotte Coolhorn's ultimate ability, that black thorn bush that cuts off everyone from the outside world, so Yumachika is free to use his power without anyone noticing it. That is so awesome, and the fact that he says at the end as well that if Charlotte had never used that power, he would have let himself die if there was nothing else he could do about it. I think not only is that really cool, it does also cement the 11th Division as something of a rogue element. You know, they don't put the mission first and foremost, they put their pride first and foremost. They put what matters most to them at the front. It doesn't matter if Yumachika would have lost and the pillar would have been destroyed. He never would have revealed the true nature of his Zanpakuto if it meant others seeing it. And I think it's cool that these characters are actually willing to see that through, even if it doesn't make them look very good in the eyes of their colleagues. Of course, Ikkaku gets chewed out big time by Iba for this failing. I think it's good on Kubo that they are written in such a way that they really will not budge on those issues. That's why I feel like there was some easy character development to be had with these characters that wasn't really utilised later on down the line. It would have been really effective, I think, to see Ikkaku saving somebody by using his bankai in front of them. This almost happens with Yumachika, but unfortunately isn't allowed to play out when Ikkaku is being devastated by the zombie Hitsugaya in the 1,000-Year Blood War, which of course we'll get to. Yumachika, in desperation, actually tries to activate Ruriru Kujaku, the true form of his Zanpakuto, but he's defeated before he actually gets the chance to. So Ikkaku is defeated, Yumachika, kind of flying into a rage, is then knocked out for his own good by Kira, and that's really those two out of the fight. Meanwhile, in Wako Mundo, Zaraki arrives with Byakuya to save Ichigo from the Zero Espada Yami Largo. Zaraki is the one who really takes Yami on, actually having this massive battle with him. Yami, again, is not the most complex of characters. Even in his Resurrection, his abilities range from Sero to Bala, and that's about it. And again, they just have this massive slugfest of a fight right up Zaraki's alley. Unfortunately for Zaraki, he is left wanting when it comes to this fight, despite Yami's massive bulk, his massive size, his massive Reiatsu. He is still, unfortunately, pretty bad at fighting, it seems, and Zaraki is able to overpower him fairly easily, even beginning to have a skirmish with Byakuya himself before the two of them put the finishing blows to Yami and end the fight before returning once the war is won. When it comes to the Lost Agent arc, there are very few Shinigami really involved in this storyline, but two of the Shinigami that arrive in the world of the living to help Ichigo against execution are none other than Kenpachi Zaraki and Ikkaku Madarame. All of the characters that arrive, bar Hitsugaya, are characters that have some kind of a personal relationship with Ichigo, and like I mentioned earlier, as we see at the end of the Soul Society arc, really it's the 11th division that Ichigo gravitates to in terms of who he might end up being closest to, who his friends are likely to be within the Soul Society. We see that he has a friendship building with Ikkaku, even with Zaraki, even if Zaraki kind of treats him like trash sometimes, thinks he's a bug who's getting in the way. At the end of the day, they do have that personal relationship that's forged through steel. Both of them, along with numerous other Shinigami, donated their Reiatsu to Ichigo to help him restore his Shinigami powers, and when it comes to battling execution, Zaraki destroys Giriko in a single hit, carrying on that tradition we've seen from Tesla, while Ikkaku takes on Shishigiwara Mo in a slightly more even battle, quite an interesting fight actually, that turns into just a hand-to-hand battle, where they're both punching each other in the face. But eventually Ikkaku wins that one and lectures Shishigiwara on what it means to put your life on the line, showing an Ikkaku who can be mature and maybe has even done a little bit of growing up. Zaraki and Ikkaku close out the arc by watching Ichigo as he duels Ginjo, completing his mission before returning to the Soul Society. And so we arrive at the 1000-year Blood War arc, and once again, the 11th Division has a ton to do here. Now, mostly, that is Zaraki that has a lot to do. Ikkaku and Yumichika serve a strange role in this arc, in that they are mostly spectators, and they are mostly spectators to Mayuri Kurotsuchi. I'm not really sure what's going on there, but Kubo has Mayuri interact with this duo in both the fight against Giselle and the fight against Pernida. Both times, they are watching from the outside as Mayuri does battle against a Sternritter. I can see why Kubo would want to pair them up once, but to do so twice is definitely a little bit strange. But the arc begins with Ikkaku and Yumichika investigating some disappearances in Rukongai, and then when we get to the first Quincy invasion, Zaraki shows up having killed 3 Sternritter again with total ease, dumping them on the floor before going for who he believes to be the Quincy King, Yuhabak. However, Zaraki is not only defeated by this Quincy, who turns out to be Roid Lloyd, but he is humiliatingly crushed to a pulp, to the point where he is put into a comatose state once the first invasion comes to an end. Ikkaku and Yumichika are not really seen throughout this battle too much, although they do react to Ichigo's arrival into the Soul Society, and later a heavily wounded Ikkaku would react with despair upon hearing about Zaraki's condition. Later, a healed Zaraki would do battle with Unohana, revealed now to be the first captain of the 11th Division, that first ever Kenpachi who actually had the name Yachiru, of course the name of someone Zaraki admired, the name that he gave to his would-be vice-captain. And it's of course a really powerful fight that at the time of recording this I am very much looking forward to seeing in the anime, probably in a couple of weeks' time. Hopefully they really do it justice, but this is a true battle of demons, a dance of blood, a battle of lust in many ways, lust for battle that turns into something of a romantic dance between the two of them as they both teeter on the brink of death all the time, both loving every single second of this battle of theirs. It's really very effective, and I also love that you see the effect this fight has on those around them. Yachiru up in the 11th Division barracks looking down at Zaraki's eye patch that he'd left behind, knowing what this potentially means for him, is a really powerful moment, and this is probably one of the most important moments for the 11th Division as a whole, as that tradition of Kenpachi finally officially gets to carry on over into Zaraki's hands, because nobody had ever killed Unohana before this point. So really, she had never actually given up her title, and we actually get to see the blood washing from her hands as she's able to finally pass away, having given Zaraki back that power that he locked away. But now that Zaraki finally has the official title of Kenpachi, he can finally hear his sword and begin to forge a relationship with Nozarashi. The second Quincy invasion begins. Ikkaku and Yumachika meet up with Hisagi in the middle of the battlefield, but all three of them are very quickly taken out by masked masculine. Meanwhile, Yachiru is busy helping Isane build an infirmary, a makeshift infirmary in the middle of Quincy territory to help wounded Shinigami where they can, in this instance including the fallen captains Rose and Kensei. Yachiru has been breaking into Quincy buildings, stealing their mattresses so that the Shinigami have something to lie down on, when suddenly they are attacked by Gwenaelle Lee. Yachiru gets a small fight here where we actually get to see her utilize what appears to be a very strange and unorthodox Shikai in the form of Sanpo Kenju, before eventually the Sturmitter Gremmy arrives, doing away with Gwenaelle and defeating Yachiru, forcing Zaraki to come in and save the day. Now this is a new Zaraki, burdened by the responsibility of the title that he now bears. As Gremmy creates a titanic arena for the two of them to do battle on, we can hear the cheers and the joy of the 11th Division members who all gather round to urge Zaraki on, who believe that he will win the day for them. Now that Zaraki has arrived, they can actively turn the tables on the fight once again. And this is what I mean by the men of the 11th Division having this utmost reverence for Zaraki himself, that simply by feeling his presence on the battlefield, much in the same way as Yamamoto did to everybody in the first invasion, they are once again pumped up to continue fighting. Of course, Zaraki would activate his Shikai, destroy Gremmy's impending meteor, and win the battle against the Sturmritter. However, afterwards, Yachiru has mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind an intact Shihakusho. Sending out his men to try and find her, Zaraki is suddenly blindsided by the arrival of the Bambis. And again, we talked about this in one of our Bleach the Best Scenes video, but it's here that Zaraki and the 11th Division as a whole truly crumble. The Bambis see an opportunity to take out one of the biggest problems they have, and they go for it, destroying many members of this division, viciously killing them with their cavalcade of abilities before Zaraki himself is near death, only to be rescued by Ichigo. Meanwhile, Ikkaku and Yumachika managed to get back up on their feet. Presumably they were healed at some point, or they were only knocked out and eventually woke up again, but they join a group of Shinigami who help defend Ichigo upon his arrival from the rest of the Sternritter, with Ikkaku even trying to attack Basby from above at one point. However, when Yhwach manages to escape to the Royal Palace, his blasting off sends out such a massive rippling shockwave that this huge battle is split up, the Shinigami and the Sturmritter flying off in multiple different directions, and we see Ikkaku and Yumachika end up facing Sturmritter Z Giselle Jewel. The two of them briefly battle Giselle and the zombified Bambietta, but although Ikkaku is able to stab Bambietta in the head and Yumachika is able to cut off her arm, Zombietta still manages to get the better of both of them until Mayuri arrives to save them, and this is the beginning of that weird relationship that these three characters end up having now for the rest of the arc. For some reason, Kubo just resigns Ikkaku and Yumachika to being Mayuri's cheerleaders. However, everyone eventually ends up returning to the stronghold of the Shinigami to prepare for the final showdown in Varvelt. We see a newly healed Ikkaku, Yumachika, and Zaraki as everyone gathers to make their final assault. There's a really nice moment where Zaraki is desperate to find Yachiru. He tries to simply leave the mission, break down the door, and go and find her himself. However, he is convinced to stay by Nanao, who assures him that the 11th Division must surely be on it. When it comes to that final battle in Varvelt, Zaraki and his men arrive late with Mayuri, and they all face off against Pernida Pankajaz. Zaraki is immediately and uncharacteristically defeated, but Ikkaku and Yumachika are able to rescue him, pulling him away from the now dangerous battlefield, and watch Mayuri as he fights the Sternritter, again just simply watching him from the sidelines, occasionally calling out to him when something crazy is going on. When the fight is over, a seriously wounded Mayuri is helped to his healing pods by Ikkaku and Yumachika, who place him inside one of them, along with Zaraki, so that they can all be healed, before Ikkaku and Yumachika thank Mayuri. Again, a really nice moment, and again shows you just how far these characters have come. Back in the Soul Society arc, Ikkaku refused to tell Mayuri anything about the person he battled. He had no respect for the maniacal scientist whatsoever, and the same was true in reverse, as Mayuri even prepared to attack the injured and incapacitated Shinigami before being stopped by Zaraki. Now, they are kneeling to their captain's saviour and outright thanking him for everything he has done. However, while Ikkaku and Yumachika proceed to make their way to where the rest of the fighting is happening, somehow Kenpachi is healed in what can't be more than a few minutes, and ends up making it to the battlefield even before they do. I can't help but feel at this point all logic was basically being thrown out of the window in service of a cool moment, but it is a neat moment all the same. Zaraki joins in the battle against Gerard, effectively usurping it from Hitsugaya and Byakuya, even going so far as to involuntarily activate Bankai. We discover where Yachiru disappeared to. It turns out that she had actually been Zaraki's Zanpakuto spirit, his Bankai's Zanpakuto spirit, this entire time, and upon activation of Nozarashi in the battle against Gremi, she could finally disappear and return to his inner world. And so we see her granting Zaraki the power to use Bankai against Gerard. He does so, he overpowers the Quincy, but eventually lets out too much energy and is defeated. Once the war is over, 10 years on from the ending of the 1,000-Year Blood War, we see that Ikkaku has been promoted to vice captain. Yumachika finally has the position of third seat he has always wanted, and they have the utmost admiration and even worship of their own division. It has grown to a near comical level, to the point where Zaraki is constantly being frustrated by it. Eventually, they all make it to Rukia's captain inauguration. When it comes to the Hell arc, we do get to see a little bit more of what these characters are up to. Ikkaku is now the master of his very own training dojo within the Soul Society, where one of his trainees is none other than Renji and Rukia's child, Ichika Abarai. As he is training with her briefly sparring with her, Yumachika arrives on the scene to let him know that as a vice captain, Ikkaku must be a part of the ceremony in the world of the living to help Ukitake's spirit move on. And we also see that Zaraki joins up with the rest of the captains as strange events begin to unfold. But that is basically everything up until the very final portion of Bleach for the 11th division so far. As you can see, this is a far-reaching division with an absolute ton of history, and it's really not hard to see why they are one of, if not the single most popular divisions in the entire series of the entire Gotei 13. I, for one, do really love this division. For me, they became more interesting as time went by, as we got more insight into the history of the tradition of Kenpachi, as we learned the truth about Unohana. I always found that to be extremely fascinating as well, and I loved their backstory in particular, showing us this feral version of Kenpachi who would eventually rise up the ranks to get that position of captain. All of that I have always enjoyed so very much, and the 11th division really for me is only one that has gotten better and better over time, and if there is a Hell arc in the works, I can't wait to see what Kubo does with them in that story, where it seems like the 11th division's future, more so than any other division, may be so intrinsically tied to its past. But that's it for the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below, what is your favourite moment of the 11th division? Who is your favourite 11th division character? Do let me know in the comments below. I would absolutely love to hear. Until next time, make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already, and until then, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.